visiting Gaudi's Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, I was struck by an artwork right above the sacred altar that depicted what should have been the crucifixion of Christ. Raised as a Greek Orthodox, I could hardly recognize the scene, as above the cross was a warm-colored canopy with grapes hanging from its frame, like from some gypsy caravan. The image exerted a joyfulness that is totally absent in between the somber walls of Greek monasteries, where tears of humility can be seen running the counter of starving saints who look back solemnly from their world of shadows. But then again, everything about this cathedral is different. It was designed by one of the most inspired architects of the past century, Antoni Gaudi, whose vision takes us on a walk through an enchanted forest of marble columns that branch out like trees bathed in psychedelic colors pouring in from the stained glass windows. It feels sacred, but in contrast to other Spanish temples, Gaudi's masterpiece invites nature in a way that's almost pagan. While looking up, I could not help but wonder, who exactly was this dying god? Comparisons between religions are not popular among Christians and Muslims, who, unlike other faiths, they believe that theirs is the only one true, the rest little more than fairy tales. And yet, for the scholars who study their history, religions are never the clean little boxes that their believers would like them to be, but rather flow into one another, exchanging ideas and ritual forms, sometimes preserving and other times changing their original meaning. And Joseph Campbell, arguably the most popular among these scholars, was pretty clear on Christianity's debt when he wrote that no one familiar with the mythologies of the ancient world can turn to the Bible without recognizing counterparts on every page. And so, let's turn to these mythologies, where some 7,000 years ago in the Near East we find the worship of a male god who represents fertility, sexuality, and the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. A cycle that was first witnessed in the cultivated fields somewhere between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the fertile lands where the first of human cultures grew their crops. Together with this change in food production came a new religion, one that focused on the yearly cycle of sowing and harvesting, a cycle that was mirrored in the life and death of a god, the ever-dying and ever-rising god, son of a great mother goddess that represented the earth. In the fertile crescent of the Near East, this agrarian cycle began in spring, where the new crops that came from the bowels of Mother Earth stood ready for the harvest that happened just before the beginning of summer. In the life of the ever-dying god, this was a time of youth, where he appeared in full glory and full sexuality, ready to be cut down, sacrificed, just like the crops during the great harvest. A necessary death, if you will, from which life is sustained, as both animal and man must symbolically eat from his body in the form of bread, the fruit of the earth. After this act of ritual sacrifice come the seasons of autumn and winter, seasons of death, where the leftovers, the seeds, are returned to the earth's bowel in a sort of burial. And there, almost miraculously, new life can be seen sprouting forth as early as late December, the time of the winter solstice, or Christmas, when the god is born again, risen from the dead, while through his dying and rising, we, the believers, are also made immortal. But how exactly does this happen? Well, one of Joseph Campbell's definitions for myth was metaphor transparent to transcendence. What Campbell meant by this was that while myths borrow their elements from the real world, like in the case of the crops becoming the original inspiration for the sacrificed god, they have the power to move the initiate beyond them and into eternity. For the cultures that planted the first crops, the cycle of the harvest was made transparent to the eternal cycle of birth and death, which never stops turning, thus inevitably leading to rebirth, as something that happened once has no reason for not happening again. The initiate, who identifies with a cycle rather than a single moment like youth or old age, will have life everlasting. And so, a god was created to carry this process through, a half-god, born out of the mystical union between a true god and a mortal woman. During his festivals, his body was represented as bread and his blood by wine, the fruits of the dying crops, eaten and drunk near springtime and during the great harvest as an act of symbolic cannibalism. And after his death, the god will be reborn, and with him, the whole of mankind. Now, did we just describe Jesus Christ or Dionysus? And if this question took you by surprise, just think of the Holy Sacrament during the Christian Eucharist and just for a moment observe its symbols, not as a believer, but as a scientist. Differences, however, are just as important as similarities. The Greeks celebrated their dying god Dionysus in orgiastic feasts where wine flowed abundant, and some even believed that psychedelics similar to LSD were consumed along with it. In contrast, the religion of Jesus placed its center not in this world with its innumerable pleasures and pains, but the next. And so, after Christianity became the only permissible religion, the life energies of the human body could no longer find expression in spirit. This sudden turn away from nature is thought to have created a deep rift in the collective psyche of Europeans, one that is perhaps still felt today. And it's precisely this tension that is reflected so well in Gaudi's work and life. On the one hand, this marvelous architect was a devout Catholic who lived an ascetic life of abstinence devoted entirely to his work, which earned him the title of God's architect. But a simple glance at Gaudi's work and the pagan symbols that dress some of his designs tell a different story. From the dragon-like reptiles that adorn Park Güell, even to mushrooms that some have suggested represent the Amanita muscaria psychedelic mushroom. And why should we be surprised, as Spain itself is a fascinating country full of contradictions, where the intensity of religious piety is constantly pierced through by the undergrowth of a pagan past that it's trying hard to conceal. Bullfights are connected in meaning with Dionysus, who often appeared as a bull, the sacrificial animal of Minoan Crete, linking the entire Mediterranean coast back to its Greek roots. And during the turbulent turn of the last century, the celebrated poet Federico Garcia Lorca reintroduces the horned god in his play Yerma, claiming he was not a stranger to these lands but of pura tierra, straight out of this Iberian earth. But here we need to stop our assumptions out of respect for the man and his work, understanding that we will never be certain of what exactly he had in mind when creating his masterpiece. We can, however, look at the results and let our eyes be the ultimate judges on whether Gaudi had intended for us to see Jesus or an eternity shining through him.